I don't suppose that anybody here remembers the name Harold Camping. He was a California character that the mainstream media used to love to bring up every now and then. I sometimes think is an example of California eccentricity. He was a evangelical conservative radio host from Northern California who was always predicting the end of the world, the rapture and the end of the world. I remember in particular in 2011, he had 2 dates. One in September was going to be the rapture, and then October was the end of the world. When the rapture did not occur, all of the TV cameras were there at his front door. Why they didn't have anything else to broadcast, I don't know. But they were there, and he admitted that the rapture had not occurred. He was wrong about that, but he was not wrong about the end of the world, which did not happen, and the cameras were back. This went on for many years. The headlines were, "Harold Camping, wrong again." There's something about us that loves apocalyptic language. We love dystopian fiction. Look, especially at times when things are bad. The more it seems like we're going to hell in a handbasket, the more we like that language. Do you know that expression, going to hell in a handcart? You know where that comes from? California Gold Rush. Because they had to lower somebody in a handbasket who was going to set the explosive charge. And you had to just hope you'd get pulled up quick enough. Yes, going to hell in a handbasket. We love dystopian stories. Handmaid's Tale. Patriarchy gives everybody an outfit. So you know where you stand. You know where you are on the pecking order. You can't get complacent about being on top or on the bottom. You know where you are. There's the zombie apocalypse series. And that awful movie, The Road, did anybody see that? Where the world is darkened and human beings become cannibals. I just finished reading The Uninhabitable Earth, which is all about climate change. Apocalyptic to its core. Barbara Ehrenreich's son, Ben, has written a beautiful piece called Desert Notebooks, which was just published in the last few months, which is about actually Joshua Tree, Las Vegas, and this neck of the woods. And it feels very much like a reverie, a memoir of end times. It's not just progressives that use apocalyptic language about climate change. So do people on the conservative side of the spectrum. If you go through West Virginia, you will see billboards created by the coal industry which say things like, your jobs are in jeopardy. Your lifestyle, they're coming for your lifestyle. They're coming for your way. They're coming for your families. They're coming for you. That everything evil is on the other side, and one needs to be afraid. Both cases, disasters on its way, and the bad guys are going to get you. Will you pray with me? Oh God, once again we gather to listen to the past, to breathe into the present, to hear hard to the ground for the sound of your word rumbling through everything. May what I say this morning be useful, be hopeful, be present. Amen. When I lived in Davis, California, their country's oldest cooperative food market is there. And soon after I moved there, there was an ad in the classifieds. They were hiring people, and it said a phrase I will never forget. They were looking for people with a sense of urgency. That's a grocery store. It is California. Looking for people with a sense of urgency. Now, this sermon is not really about climate change. As much as you might want it to be at this moment, it really is about that sense of urgency in the world today, that apocalyptic sense. There was a great sense of urgency in the first century as well. In the beginnings of Christianity and when the New Testament was being developed, there was a huge current of apocalyptic feeling. I cannot begin to tell you how bad it was to live in the Roman Empire and how bad it was to not be an elite living in Jerusalem in the first century in the Roman Empire. 97% of those living there at that time were not elites. Only 3% were. The 97% lived in varying degrees of poverty. There was extreme inequality. It was a culture of extremes. The slaves did everything, not just menial tasks. They were trained to be bookkeepers, to be doctors, even to do some legal work. The elites basically did nothing except have incredibly obvious wealth and consumption. Taxes. You may or may not, many of you probably do know how taxes were collected, but this is how it worked, just in case you didn't. This is how it worked, just in case you didn't know. In Rome, they had an event where people could come and bid on the right to collect taxes in the provinces, okay? So if you bid, let's say, $5 million in order to be able to collect the taxes in Jerusalem, then you owed Rome $5 million. But you could collect as much as you could get. And you got Roman soldiers. Sometimes you had your own soldiers. And you went in and you collected from the people whatever you could get out of them, and then you sent Rome what you told them you'd send them, and you got to keep the rest. So no wonder people had feelings about tax collectors. In 1953, that book, The Go-Between, that became that great film in the 1970s, begins with the following sentence that's quite famous. The past is a different country. They do things differently there. Yes, it was different then, but at the same time, it also echoes for us the great joy and sorrow of what it means when we say we're human. And when things are bad for human beings, that's when apocalyptic language, that's when apocalyptic literature and visions emerge. In the plagues, in Western civilization, during those dark times, there were lots of apocalyptic writings. Julian of Norwich, you may know that name. She wrote of her visions during the plague days in England. In Mark, the first gospel to be written, the gospel that came out of the middle of that first century in the midst of that Roman Empire, has in it a chapter, chapter 13, that's called the Little Apocalypse. And in it, Mark quotes Isaiah and says, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken, and at that time people will see the Son of Man is coming. which echoes a description of the Messiah coming in on a cloud, kind of like the Silver Surfer. If you're familiar with those comic books. Yes, apocalyptic language. In the first century, something happened. Something we hear about the destruction of Jerusalem. I'm going to tell you a little bit of 4 years between the years 66 and 70. After Paul has written his letters, Paul, by the way, was very apocalyptic. He very much believed that Jesus was going to return at any day and fix things. There were those around Jesus in those days called zealots who believed in the violent overthrow of Rome and wanted Jesus very much to participate. Some scholars have posited that Judas may have been a zealot, and that's why he was so distressed with Jesus, because Jesus did not take up arms against Rome. Well, something happened in the year 66. It was Passover. And in Passover, there were people from all over the inhabited world who were coming to celebrate and be behind the wall in Jerusalem and be in the temple. And at that time, those that Rome had left in charge, and at that time, Rome was appointing the high priests in the temple. I don't know, they absconded with something, some silver, some wealth, something that was part of the temple that was sacred to people. They removed, which a band of zealots took great umbrage at, and killed a small Roman garrison that was there. That distressed Rome, and they sent a larger group of soldiers into Jerusalem, and those soldiers were fought back, and many of them were killed, which gave this band of zealots a great deal of energy. But all of a sudden, Rome paid very close attention to Jerusalem and sent tens of thousands of soldiers under the generalship of General Titus, who would later become an emperor of Rome. And Titus took the soldiers and circled the city, and the city was laid for siege for 5 years. And all those people that had come from around the inhabited world were now stuck behind the walls, and the Roman soldiers were on the outside of the walls. They managed to feed themselves, but you know, for those of you who've read The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or seen Game of Thrones, you all know how bad it is in a sieged city and what kinds of terrible things can happen. How anybody who was so afraid that they wanted to just go out and accede to Rome and say, oh, we're sorry, come back in, anybody who suggested that that was a good idea was instantly executed. So all those people and their families, desperate, stuck there together, getting worse and worse. And on the outside, the Roman soldiers are tired of being away from their families, tired of being in this no place, tired of encircling this city. The zealots at one point had dug tunnels underneath the walls and had loosened up the soil on the outside of the city so badly that those ramparts and the machinery of Rome fell through and needed to be rebuilt. The soldiers were quite ready to take the city. And when they did, the Jewish historian Josephus writes about it, the streets ran red with blood. The soldiers were so ready to enact vengeance, they killed everybody they saw. Josephus tells stories of the soldiers walking on tops of bodies many feet high. Titus wanted to save the temple because he wanted to turn it into a Roman pagan site. But some accidental thing set it on fire, and the whole thing burned, and that just enraged everybody, and all the stones were torn down, and the city was destroyed, and the people were scattered. And that event is out of which Christianity emerges. That event is out of which the Gospels and the New Testament writing occur. We have very apocalyptic beginnings. There was an extreme sense of urgency in early Christianity. And you know, it would be right to really not call it early Christianity singular, but early Christianities. There were many ways of believing and being a Christian in the first century. And we only know some of those in the Gospels. And we're learning more and more about that diversity as we uncover new documents. But there was a great sense of urgency. Titus's younger brother Domitian is emperor by the end of that first century. And while he is emperor, we believe, or some believe, that it was at that time that the book of Revelation is developed. The book of Revelation represents apocalyptic mythology. Mythology is a word that gets a bad rap, especially in progressive churches, because we think of it as something untrue, right? A falsehood, a myth. Mythology is colorful. It's a language of dragons and fiery horsemen and explosions and great battles and angels coming in and the Messiah like a silver surfer and hope appearing in a cloud. Apocalyptic language is often the language of the oppressed. It is often the language of the people on the bottom. The people who are elite tend to be more complacent, tend to be more a people who think things are okay the way they are. The Isle of Patmos, which is this rocky outcrop in the middle of the Mediterranean, part of, I think, Greece. Patmos was a place where Rome dumped its political prisoners, where Rome dumped everybody that was a pain in the neck. So if you write letters to your congresspeople, you might have ended up on Patmos with everybody else. You've been to demonstrations, if you'd spoken out, if you'd been a member of a church like this, you might have ended up on Patmos. And it's out of Patmos that this book appears with all its apocalyptic imagery about evil, about Rome, about the evil of Rome and how that evil will be broken. In apocalyptic mythology, it looks back towards all the creation stories where chaos reigns and order comes in and creates calmness and creates beauty and creates something out of that chaos. And the book of Revelation refers to that same chaos as a force in Rome that is threatening to take over humanity. And says something will get recreated. There will be a new heaven. There will be a new earth. John Gager, who was actually I think he is, retired sociologist who taught at Princeton for many years, he had a thesis about the book of Revelation, which I have often thought of, which is basically that it's a liturgical work, that it was intended to be recited, and that the people on Patmos would recite the words from the book of Revelation as a way of recounting and reanimating their fear for the present and their hope for the future. It helped them with their sense of urgency and helped to eradicate any complacency they might feel. When I was an undergrad, I had a math professor who was just as odd sometimes as math professors are. And he had a quote on his door, which actually was from him. I remember seeing it and seeing his name at the bottom, and I wish I had written it down exactly, but I remember basically it said, math is best because it not only describes what is, but also what is possible. The book of Revelation describes not only the world as it was, but how its people felt it would be transformed. Apocalyptic literature comes in the midst of pandemics, climate change, political division, great inequality. Alex Steffen, the futurist, guy who writes about sustainability, says this: optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy for us to think that nothing is going to get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. And that's the urgency that I want us to feel in the midst of this time about everything. That this is a moment in history when so much is pressing upon us that might make us feel disaster-prone. But I want us to remember how the people on Patmos visioned how the world as it might be. And to that end, I've taken a piece from the book of Revelation, and we'll stand together and recite it.
There's no need of the sun or the moon, it is lit by the face of God.
I was shown a river of the water of life. It was clear as crystal. It flowed by the throne and through the streets of the city.
A river of life flowed through the city.
I saw a tree. It grew over both banks of the river. It was the tree of life. Its fruit was for the healing of the nations.
A river of life flowed through the city.
I saw that everything evil was gone. Lamps for light and the sun were gone. Night itself was gone. God's face was the light for the city.
God's face was the light for the city.